I realized I was being gaslit by everyone around me, even my own family. I never thought I'd wake up one morning and feel like the ground under me had shifted in ways I couldn't see. But here I am, sitting at my small kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that's gone cold while trying to make sense of a week that has made me question everything about my own mind. Maybe it started subtly, just little things. But the more I think about it, the more it feels like I've been walking through a fog for months or maybe years, and only now am I noticing the fog isn't mine. It's everyone else's. It began at work, of course. I'm a software analyst in a mid-sized tech firm here in Chicago, and on paper, things were fine. I've always been diligent, the kind of guy who gets things done before the deadline, but never loud, never aggressive. I like it that way. I like feeling competent without making a scene. But a few weeks ago, something shifted, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was at first. I remember the first incident vividly. It was a Monday morning, and I was reviewing the latest sprint updates in our shared project board. There was a task I had completed on Friday, a small but critical bug fix, and I noticed a comment from one of my colleagues, Mark, questioning whether I had actually done it correctly. "Are you sure this is tested?" he wrote. I frowned at the screen. Of course I was sure. I had tested it multiple times and the QA report had been clean. I replied, calmly explaining the steps I'd taken, but then he added, almost as an afterthought, "I could have sworn you missed this part last week, but maybe I'm remembering wrong." At first I shrugged it off. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe I had overlooked something. Maybe he just didn't remember correctly. But that little phrase, "maybe I'm remembering wrong," kept gnawing at me. Why did it feel like a seed being planted in my mind? I replayed my Friday afternoon in my head over and over. I remembered exactly what I had done. I was meticulous, but still, a weird uncertainty began creeping in. It wasn't just work. My friends started doing it too. Little things, casual conversations where I'd mention something we had done together and suddenly it was like I was in an alternate reality. "Wait, we didn't do that," my friend Jordan said one night when I brought up a hike we had gone on last month. "Yeah, we did. Remember the trail with the waterfall?" I insisted, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Jordan laughed. Not meanly, but in that way that makes you question yourself. "Dude, no, I don't remember that at all. Are you sure you're not mixing it up with last year?" I froze. I wanted to argue, to pull out pictures from my phone, but even those felt uncertain. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had remembered wrong. And just like that, the line between what actually happened and what I imagined began to blur. At home, it was worse. My parents, who I had always trusted, started doing it in subtle ways too. I would mention an incident from my childhood or something my siblings had done, and suddenly they'd tell me I was remembering it wrong or that I was being dramatic. "You're imagining things," my mom said once when I brought up something my brother supposedly said about me last Christmas. "I'm not imagining it," I said, frustrated. "He literally said, 'No, honey, you're overthinking.'" "He wouldn't have said that," she interrupted, smiling softly as if to comfort me. But the comfort felt like dismissal. I started doubting my own memory constantly. I'd replay conversations in my head, trying to catch myself in error, but often I'd come out unsure of what was real. Was I really remembering wrong? Was I overreacting? Or was something else happening here? The work incidents kept piling up. Mark and a few other colleagues began to contradict me more often. Every time I brought up a valid point, they would say, "I don't remember it that way," or "Are you sure? That doesn't sound right." Once during a team meeting, I clearly remembered submitting a report on Friday. I even had the timestamp on my email. But when I mentioned it, my manager Lisa casually said, "I don't see it. Are you sure you sent it?" The room went quiet for a moment. I stuttered, feeling my face flush. Of course I sent it. I could see it in my sent folder. But somehow, her doubt made me pause. Maybe I'd hit draft instead. Maybe I had imagined sending it. My confidence began cracking, bit by bit, as if each incident was a tiny hammer hitting the foundation of my reality. Even my roommate, Kevin, started getting into the act, though I don't think he realized it. He would move things around and then insist he hadn't. He would tell me I left dishes in the sink when I hadn't, or that I agreed to plans I never actually made. I would argue, but his casual, "No man, I don't remember that at all," always made me hesitate. Even simple, harmless things started making me question my own mind. I tried to talk to someone about it, thinking maybe I was just stressed. I started seeing a therapist, trying to pin down if I was losing it. I told her about the incidents at work, the friends who contradicted me, my parents brushing off my memories. She listened carefully and asked me questions that forced me to examine my perception. "You've described consistent patterns where your memory is being questioned by multiple people," she said. "How does that make you feel?" "It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind," I admitted, "or like everyone else has this secret playbook and I'm the only one who doesn't get it." She nodded. Sometimes, when multiple people in your environment consistently tell you that your perception is wrong, it can create real confusion. It doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. It's worth exploring whether this could be a form of manipulation or gaslighting. I had heard the term before, usually in dramatic TV shows or articles online about abusive relationships. I didn't think it could happen to me. I never imagined that it could creep into every aspect of life: work, friends, family. But as I started paying attention, the pieces fit too neatly. Every time I asserted myself, there was subtle resistance, doubt, or outright contradiction. Every time I felt confident, someone pulled the rug out from under me, and no one seemed to notice or care. I began documenting everything. I wrote down conversations, saved emails, kept a small notebook of incidents. At first it felt obsessive, but soon it became my lifeline. Looking back at the records, I could see patterns. Minor incidents at first, then increasingly manipulative behavior. Not extreme, not overt abuse, but just enough to make me question my perception. One night, I tried to test it. I mentioned a past conversation to my friend Jordan, someone I trusted. "Remember last month when we went to the diner after work?" I asked. Jordan laughed, shaking his head. "No, man, you're imagining that. We didn't go anywhere after work. You're probably mixing it up with the day we had lunch." I stared at him, heart sinking. The diner visit was real. I had the receipt in my pocket. But even showing it to him, he just laughed it off, saying, okay, maybe that happened, but I didn't remember it. I walked home that night feeling smaller than I had in years. I couldn't even trust my closest friends. I couldn't trust my own mind. The funny thing was, Jordan probably didn't realize the effect of his words. He wasn't being malicious. He was part of a system, intentionally or not, that made me doubt myself. And that thought terrified me. If people didn't even realize they were doing it, who was left to trust? At home, it was worse. My parents' dismissal had started to take a toll on my confidence. I would bring up incidents with my brother or extended family and they would shrug them off, call me overly sensitive, or simply say I was mistaken. I remember one argument vividly. "Mom, Dad, I heard Uncle Richard say something really weird about me last week. He was implying..." I hesitated because even saying it aloud made me doubt my memory. "Nonsense," my dad said, waving a hand. "Richard wouldn't say that. You must have misunderstood him." "No, I'm not misunderstanding," I insisted, though my voice wavered. "Calm down, son. You've been stressed. You're reading too much into things," my mom added, smiling in that condescending way that made me feel like a child being scolded. I left the room feeling small, unsure, and angry. Angry at them, yes, but mostly at myself. How had I become this person who couldn't trust my own recollection? I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was imagining patterns that weren't there. Maybe I was too sensitive. But the more I paid attention, the more I saw the signs. Every workplace interaction, every friend conversation, every family discussion. Tiny, almost imperceptible manipulations. Comments that made me doubt my memory. Jokes that made me question my perception. And the ever-present feeling of isolation. I started noticing the subtle betrayals too. People claiming credit for things I did. Ideas I suggested being attributed to someone else. Small jokes at my expense that everyone else laughed at but I felt uneasy about. The more it happened, the more I internalized it. Asking myself, was I really that incompetent? Was I imagining things again? Some nights I would lie awake and replay the week, wondering if I was losing it. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. Maybe I had always been this forgetful, overthinking, dramatic person. But deep down, a quiet voice told me otherwise. Something wasn't right. Something had shifted. Something was designed to make me question myself. And it worked. The chapter of subtle doubts closed with me sitting alone on my apartment couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together reality from the fragments left behind by everyone else's influence. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to get easier, that the doubts would grow, that the manipulation wasn't subtle anymore. It was strategic, even if they didn't realize it, and I didn't know who to trust. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone in my own head. After that first week of creeping doubt, things didn't calm down. They got worse. It's funny how subtle manipulation works. At first, you think maybe it's just stress, maybe you're imagining things, but the more it happens, the more you realize it's a pattern, a rhythm, like someone else is conducting the orchestra of your life and you don't even know the music. I started documenting everything. At first it was casual, a note on my phone here, a line scribbled in my journal there, but soon it became obsessive. Every conversation, every incident, every moment that didn't add up got a line. Time, place, what was said, how I felt. I had to do it. Because without proof, I was losing ground. I couldn't trust my memory anymore, but I could trust these notes. At least they were concrete. At least they existed outside my head. Work became a battlefield. The project I had been leading, well, technically contributing more than leading, was being subtly undermined by coworkers who were so casual about it that I almost didn't notice. Mark was the first. He'd interrupt my presentations with tiny corrections that made me doubt myself. And every time he did it, Lisa, our manager, would laugh softly, like it was funny, not realizing, or maybe not caring, how undermining it felt. One day, I suggested a small improvement to a module we were developing, something I thought would optimize performance significantly. Hours later, I noticed that someone else had implemented the idea, and when I mentioned it, the credit was subtly redirected. "Oh yeah, I think Jordan mentioned that last week," Mark said casually, his voice light, almost innocent. I froze. Jordan hadn't mentioned it. I remembered, because I had the note from the conversation on my phone. But when I brought it up, Mark laughed, Lisa smiled, and suddenly, I was the one who looked silly. Maybe I had misremembered. Maybe I was imagining things again. It wasn't just work. My social life became another maze of uncertainty. Friends I had known for years started twisting small details of events we shared. One night, I was recounting a dinner we had had at a new Italian place, and Jordan said, "I don't remember that at all. Are you sure you're not mixing it up with that time last month? I held my tongue. I wanted to argue, I wanted to prove him wrong, but I'd already learned how dangerous that was. People didn't want confrontation. They wanted you to doubt yourself quietly. And when I doubted myself, the tension dissolved. I started testing myself. I kept receipts, timestamps, screenshots of texts, photographs of events. It was ridiculous, like I was preparing for a trial I never wanted to be a part of. But I couldn't stop. Every interaction, every conversation, I had to verify. If I didn't, I'd feel the creeping anxiety that maybe I was imagining things again. And the promotion, that was the breaking point. I had been working for a mid-level manager position for months. I had the qualifications, the experience, the dedication. I had even prepared a presentation to pitch myself for the role. I rehearsed it over and over, confident in my abilities. Then came the meeting. Lisa, Mark, and a few other team leads sat around the table. I presented my case, my accomplishments, my contributions, my vision for the team. I was nervous, yes, but prepared. I laid it all out clearly. Afterward, Lisa said something casual, almost offhand. We'll consider everyone, of course, but let's be honest. There are other candidates who have stronger interpersonal skills. Work well with the team, no friction. I blinked. Friction? Friction. Who was causing friction here? I felt the anger rise, but also creeping self-doubt. Had I been difficult? Had I misread cues? Argued unnecessarily? Been too assertive? I replayed every meeting, every conversation, every interaction. Nothing came to mind. Days later, the promotion went to someone else. A coworker who had less experience, less contribution, and, from my perspective, was more polished in bending reality to everyone's perception. And while they celebrated, I sat in my cubicle, rereading my notes, realizing that the campaign to discredit me had been subtle but effective. Even my relationships outside of work were strained. I had been dating a woman named Claire for a few months, and at first it was great. Then small incidents started to pile up. She'd say she had said something to me or that I had agreed to plans I never did. Once I asked her if she remembered a movie we had gone to last week, and she said, "We didn't go, I think you're imagining that." I argued, showed her the ticket stub, even a picture I had taken in the theater. She laughed it off. "Okay, fine, maybe we did, but I honestly don't remember. You're being dramatic." The word dramatic stung. It became a theme. Everyone in my life seemed to have the same casual way of dismissing my concerns. Friends, coworkers, romantic partners, even family. Every time I pushed, I was painted as the problem. Family moments were perhaps the most painful. My parents were masters of subtle dismissal. A few weeks ago, I tried to bring up something that had happened with my brother. He had made a cruel comment at a family gathering, and I had overheard it clearly. "Mom, Dad," I said carefully, trying to stay calm. "Did you hear what Jake said at dinner? It felt wrong." They both looked at me as though I had said something absurd. "No, honey, you're imagining it. Jake wouldn't say that," Mom said, her voice soft, comforting. "You always do this," I snapped, my voice louder than intended. "I'm not imagining it. He literally..." "You're being paranoid. Calm down. It wasn't like that," Dad interrupted, shaking his head. I left the room with a sinking feeling, realizing once again that reality was being reinterpreted by everyone around me. It was like living in a funhouse mirror where every reflection is warped, every memory questioned, every perception doubted. I began to notice patterns. It wasn't random. It was everywhere. The subtle undermining, the contradictions, the casual dismissal, all followed a rhythm. Every time I started to assert myself, a wave of doubt would be planted in my mind. Every time I felt confident, someone would undercut me with a comment, a question, or a laugh. The effect was cumulative. I was losing my footing, slowly, imperceptibly. It wasn't easy to recognize or confront. Gaslighting is tricky because it isn't overt abuse. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It whispers that you're wrong, that you're mistaken, that you're overreacting. And the more you listen, the more you start to believe it. Some days, I would sit in my apartment, staring at the notes I had compiled, trying to reassure myself. "You're right," I'd whisper. "You remember correctly. They're lying or they're wrong." But even as I said it, a voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Maybe you're wrong. Maybe it's you." I didn't have anyone to validate me. Not really. Every attempt to bring evidence was met with casual dismissal, laughter, or claims that I was being too sensitive. Even the therapist sessions helped only partially. They helped me see the patterns, recognize manipulation, but they couldn't fix the isolation I felt in daily life. The tension bled into every corner of my existence. I double-checked emails, retraced steps, reread texts, memorized conversations. Every word mattered. Every glance, every laugh, every sigh from someone around me could be interpreted as part of the manipulation. And slowly, I felt my anxiety settle into my bones. A constant weight, a reminder that my reality was under siege. The hardest part was realizing how much it affected me emotionally. I was angry, yes, but I was also exhausted. Paranoia was my new companion, subtle but persistent. I didn't trust my coworkers, my friends, my family, my own memory. And that alone is terrifying. You don't need someone to attack you physically when they can twist reality around you. You just need people to insist, subtly, consistently, that your perception is wrong. And when everyone participates, even unknowingly, you begin to feel like the problem isn't them, it's you. By the end of the week, I was tracking incidents in detail. Time, place, Conversation, reactions. I had spreadsheets, journals, screenshots, receipts. It was exhausting but necessary. I couldn't rely on anyone else to validate me. Not my coworkers, not my friends, not even my parents. The web of manipulation had tightened, and the only way to survive it was to document it, analyze it, and hope that eventually I could find a way out. And somewhere deep down, I realized that the only thing I could truly trust was myself and my notes. Everything else was suspect. Sitting in my apartment that Sunday night, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. But it wasn't relief. It was awareness. The web was tightening, yes, but now I could see it. I could trace the threads, and maybe, just maybe, seeing it clearly would be the first step in untangling it. I hadn't slept properly in weeks, maybe months. I lie in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, trying to replay every interaction from the day and wondering if I had remembered it right. Sometimes my mind would spiral in impossible loops, one conversation twisting into a dozen interpretations, one minor joke exploding into a mountain of betrayal. I was exhausted, but the insomnia didn't stop. It became its own tormentor, a quiet companion that whispered, "Maybe you're imagining things. Maybe you're crazy." Work had become unbearable. The subtle undermining that had started months ago was now relentless. Every meeting felt like a trap. Every word I spoke, dissected and twisted by colleagues who smiled as if nothing was wrong. I was tense, jittery, almost twitchy. My inbox was a minefield. Emails I had written clearly were edited, misquoted, or ignored, and when I tried to bring it up, the responses were casual, dismissive, and maddeningly polite. Then came the breakthrough, or maybe the beginning of my anger. I was going through my archived emails, trying to piece together the past month's conversations. I noticed a chain of messages from Mark that had subtle edits. A comment I clearly remembered him making in an earlier thread had been removed, replaced with a vague, almost innocent question. It wasn't blatant forgery, but it was enough. Enough to make me realize that someone had been manipulating not just conversations, but records of conversations, altered events, twisted timelines. I printed the emails, highlighted the discrepancies, and shoved them into a folder labeled evidence. I was shaking as I did it, partly from adrenaline, partly from relief. For the first time, I had something concrete, something I could show myself and, eventually, others. The little voice of self-doubt that had been hammering at me for months was slightly muted. Maybe I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe I wasn't imagining things. But just when I felt a glimmer of clarity, life threw more fire at me. At home, my parents continued their relentless, casual dismissal. One night, I brought up something that had happened with my brother. A small, seemingly insignificant comment he had made, but it had stayed with me because of the way it made me feel. "Mom, Dad, he said something really inappropriate when we were at the restaurant," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. My mother sighed, shaking her head. "You're imagining things again. He wouldn't say that. You worry too much." "You don't understand," I snapped. "I know what I heard. You can't just tell me I'm wrong every time." Dad shook his head, his tone gentle but firm. "You're stressed, son. You need to calm down. You're blowing things out of proportion." I walked out, fist clenched, my heart pounding. My own parents were part of the pattern. My safe space, my family, was manipulating me, or at least conditioning me to doubt myself. And the realization hit like a sledgehammer. I wasn't overreacting. I was being systematically undermined. Friends weren't immune either. Claire, my girlfriend at the time, had started twisting minor details into emotional minefields. I remember one evening vividly. "Oh, didn't you say you were going to pick up groceries today?" she asked casually. "I did," I replied. "I went after work." "No, you didn't. You said yesterday you'd go today. Are you sure you even went?" I was stunned. I had a receipt. I had the bag sitting in my kitchen, but when I showed it to her, she laughed. Okay, you went, but I honestly forgot. You're too sensitive about everything, too sensitive." That word had become a weapon. It disarmed me. It made me question my memory, my perception, even my sanity, and I hated it. I hated the way everyone around me could casually dismiss my reality, leaving me scrambling for proof, justification, validation. I began documenting everything more meticulously. Texts, emails, receipts, screenshots, timestamps, even voice notes when possible. I became a detective in my own life, tracing the threads of manipulation, recording incidents in obsessive detail. I had to. Without it, I felt like I was unraveling. Then came the work confrontation. I had gathered enough evidence to approach Lisa, my manager. I had printed emails, highlighted inconsistencies, and mapped out the subtle undermining from Mark and a few others. I was nervous, but determined. "Lisa, I need to talk to you about some things I've noticed," I began, my voice trembling slightly. She raised an eyebrow. "Of course, what is it?" I laid it all out. The emails, the altered messages, the subtle undermining, the misattributed work. I tried to keep my tone professional, factual. She listened, nodding, but when I finished, she leaned back in her chair, smiling faintly. "I see. Well, that's quite a collection. But are you sure you're not overanalyzing? Sometimes emails get edited accidentally and things can be misremembered." I froze. The same pattern, the same casual dismissal. Even with proof in my hands, they had a way of making me feel wrong. But something inside me had shifted. Something in my chest tightened. Not fear, but rage. I was done feeling powerless. I left the office that day with my folder in hand, heart racing, mind buzzing with possibilities. If they thought they could manipulate me with subtlety and denial, they had another thing coming. Home wasn't any easier. The next day, my parents casually mentioned some misunderstanding at dinner, something that hadn't happened the way they described. I tried to correct them. "You remember wrong," my dad said, almost kindly. "You're imagining things. You always take things too seriously." I slammed my fork down. "No, that didn't happen that way. Look at this," I said, pulling out my notes and emails, highlighting the discrepancies. Mom sighed, shaking her head. "Why do you always do this? You're paranoid and it's exhausting. Just calm down." For a moment, I wanted to scream, to shake them, to make them see what they were doing. But then I realized shouting wouldn't work. Nothing would. The manipulation wasn't just in their words. It was in the way I had been conditioned to doubt myself. I retreated to my room, heart pounding, shaking with adrenaline. And then finally, it clicked. I understood the tactics, the casual dismissals, the contradictions, the jokes that belittled me, the selective memory. It was all gaslighting. They weren't random events, they were patterns, and the more I recognized them, the more I saw how it had been happening for months, even years. Sleep didn't come that night. Instead, I stayed up, pacing my apartment, reviewing emails, planning. I realized I couldn't continue living under this subtle siege. I couldn't allow people to manipulate my reality and make me doubt myself endlessly. I had to reclaim control, and I had to do it carefully. But before I could act, I had to accept one simple truth. I was not at fault. None of this was my fault. I hadn't misremembered. I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't imagined it. The manipulators were the ones playing a game, and I had been forced into their rules. Understanding the game was the first step. The second was planning my move. I would start small, with boundaries, documentation, and clarity. I would assert myself at work, confront manipulation where I could, and reclaim the reality that had been stolen from me. That night, as I finally sat down with my notes spread across the table, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer allow others to control my perception. I would no longer question my memory, my sanity, or my worth because of their lies. The web had tightened, yes, but now I could see the threads, and the next step was untangling them, strategically, deliberately, and without fear. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the paranoia and anxiety. The breaking point had come, but with it came clarity. I wasn't a victim forever. I could fight back, and I would. I realized that hoping things would just get better wasn't going to cut it. I had been patient, meticulous, careful, watching, recording, analyzing, but nothing changed. The subtle undermining continued, and the sense of isolation lingered like a shadow that never left. Something had to be done. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. I started with boundaries. At work, I refused to engage in conversations that felt manipulative or dismissive. When Mark tried to interrupt a meeting with one of his casual corrections, I held up my hand. "Excuse me," I said calmly, "but this point has already been addressed in the report I submitted. Let's stick to the agenda." There was a brief silence. Lisa raised an eyebrow, but this time I didn't falter. I had my evidence ready. Emails, screenshots, timestamps, all meticulously organized. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't uncertain. I was asserting fact. Later that week, I called a private meeting with Lisa. I presented the timeline, the edits, the misattributed work, everything. I didn't frame it as accusation. I framed it as documentation. "Here's what I've observed over the last few months," I said. "I want to ensure that my contributions are recognized accurately and that our team communicates clearly moving forward." She glanced at the folder. Her expression was unreadable for a moment, then subtle, almost imperceptible respect flickered in her eyes. She didn't deny the evidence, and for the first time, I felt the weight of doubt lifting. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. The reality I had been documenting for months existed outside my head. Work politics didn't vanish overnight, of course. Mark still tried to push back, and a few others continued their small manipulations, but I was prepared now. Every action, every comment I could trace. I had the proof, and more importantly, I had the confidence to assert it. Outside work, I tackled personal relationships that had been eroding my sense of self. Claire was the first. I called her over one evening and laid everything out calmly. "I feel like my perception of events has been constantly questioned," I said. "I've documented specific instances, and it's not about blaming you. It's about how this pattern has affected me." She looked at me, surprised. "I didn't realize." "I know," I said, "and that's part of the problem. Even unintentional dismissal can be gaslighting. I need relationships where my experiences are acknowledged, not dismissed. If that can't happen, I have to protect myself." There was a pause. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, I want to make this work. I understand now." It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Some relationships weren't salvageable. Others, like Claire, were willing to adjust, listen, and respect boundaries. I had learned to accept that not everyone would change, and that was okay. My responsibility wasn't to make everyone see reality, it was to reclaim my own. Family was harder. My parents, entrenched in their ways, couldn't easily accept that they had contributed to years of subtle manipulation. I chose one conversation at a time, one discussion, one boundary. "Mom, Dad," I said one evening, voice calm but firm. I need to be clear. When I bring up incidents that affect me, I need them to be taken seriously. It's not a matter of being dramatic or paranoid. I am recounting reality as I experienced it. They hesitated. My father looked at me for a long moment. I didn't realize how much this affected you, he said finally. I nodded. I know you didn't intend harm, but dismissing my experiences has consequences. I need you to acknowledge that, and I need honesty moving forward. The conversation wasn't perfect. There were defensive moments, small arguments, and lingering doubts, but for the first time, I felt my own power in the dialogue. I wasn't being passive anymore. I wasn't letting others control my reality. One particularly satisfying moment came a few weeks later. At work, Mark attempted his usual subtle undermining during a team discussion. Normally, I might have hesitated, doubted my memory, questioned myself. This time, I calmly referenced an earlier email and presentation, clearly showing the steps I had taken and facts of the situation. The room went silent. Lisa nodded. Other team members glanced at me with a new level of respect. Mark blinked, caught off guard. There was no shouting, no drama, just facts, just clarity, and it felt like freedom. I realized then that reclaiming control wasn't about confrontation alone. It was about documentation, preparation, and self-confidence. I could counter manipulation without letting it define me. I could respond with certainty instead of doubt. Even my inner voice had changed. The whispers that once questioned my sanity had quieted. I no longer woke up in the middle of the night, replaying conversations obsessively. Instead, I reflected, I remember reality correctly. My perception is valid. I don't need everyone to agree, but I will not let their dismissal define me. There were lighter moments too. Friends who had been unintentionally manipulative began noticing the change. Jordan, for example, who had constantly contradicted me, started asking for my perspective more earnestly, acknowledging mistakes, and even complimenting my organization and clarity. I felt cautious optimism. Relationships could improve, but only when mutual respect was present. I also reclaimed small joys that manipulation had stolen. I started taking walks in the evenings, journaling without obsessing, reading books purely for pleasure, and even cooking again. Little routines that I had abandoned under stress now felt like acts of reclaiming my life. Of course, vigilance remained. Gaslighting doesn't disappear completely. Some colleagues would still attempt minor manipulations. Some family moments would still test my patience. And there were days I felt residual doubt. But now I had tools, evidence, boundaries, assertiveness, and confidence in my own perception. I could spot patterns before they fully took hold. I could act decisively rather than react anxiously. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned is this. Reclaiming reality isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling your own perception, protecting your mind, and refusing to let manipulation dictate your sense of self-worth. Months later, sitting in my apartment, I reflected on the journey. I had severed some relationships, repaired others, and created a system of boundaries that worked. I had confronted manipulators without losing my own integrity. I had proven to myself, beyond doubt, that my perception mattered, that my reality mattered. And in that reflection, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Not triumph, not victory in a dramatic sense, but clarity, control, autonomy over my own mind. I still remember the nights I spent awake, doubting every conversation, questioning every memory. But now, those nights serve as a reminder, not a chain. A reminder that vigilance matters, that self-respect is essential, that perception is power. And most importantly, I realized that I am enough. My mind is enough. My experiences are valid. I do not need constant validation to trust myself. Life continues, of course. People will still disappoint, misremember, or manipulate. But I am prepared. I have reclaimed my mind. And that, I think, is the most liberating feeling in the world. For anyone reading this, feeling isolated or doubting themselves, you are not wrong. Trust your mind. Document. Set boundaries. Confront manipulation with calm clarity. And above all, protect your perception, because it is yours, and no one can take it from you unless you allow them to. I've taken back my reality, one day at a time, one assertion at a time, one boundary at a time. And in doing so, I've finally come home, to my mind, to myself, and to the truth of my own life. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.